Welcome to this Inbound Logistics video podcast presented by Inbound Logistics Magazine. Today, we're talking about unlocking WMS flexibility, the role of enablement tools in modern warehousing. Our guest is Mark Fralick, Chief Technology Officer of IFS Softeon, and here's our host, Amy Roach.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome, Mark. It is so nice to have you with us.
It's great to see you. It's great to be on this. We saw you last week at Modex. Everywhere on that show, so it's exciting to get back with you again.
Absolutely. It's great to have a chance to go a little deeper than we did at Modex, and we have a lot to get through today. We're going to talk about the role of WMS enablement tools and how they help organizations unlock flexibility, scalability, efficiency. Those are kind of the big three that everyone is looking for. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that operations teams face when configuring their WMS, dive into some practical examples of how these configuration tools can help teams achieve all kinds of various objectives. But before we jump in, if you would, just give us a quick introduction and overview of yourself and of IFS Softeon as a company.
I'll start with me. You might be able to tell by my luxurious gray hair that I've been around a bit. I've actually been in the business, in this WMS business, since right before 1990, and created my own company called Software Architects, which created the WMS that is now the WMS owned by a different large WMS vendor. And after that, left them and spent 20 years doing implementations all over the world. And when Jim Heflin called me about, he came on to Softeon at the time, almost 4 years ago, he asked me if we wanted to come on board with him to kind of bring the band back together. And it's, I joined then and brought our team and our intellectual property, some of which we'll be talking about today. And it's been great. I love this industry so much because if you think about like the word inspiration, right? It really means to breathe into, and I get to work with supply chain folks that want to breathe into their facilities, breathe into their operations, new ways of doing things, new ways of achieving scalability and safety and productivity and meet the goals of their business. And so it's inspired me to be around for over 30 years, and I'm going to stay at it, as long as I can. And so, as I said, Jim and I joined Softeon about 4 years ago, coming from this long background. And about almost 2 months ago, we merged into IFS. So now we're IFS Softeon, which brings a whole new level of their specialty is really industrial AI. And so that collaboration, I think, is going to really drive things forward and in ways that are going to be very, very interesting to people.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, obviously, with your long-term experience, you've had kind of, a front row seat, if you will, to the evolution of WMS over the last few decades. So let's start there. Talk a little bit about, the changes that you've seen and why WMS platforms are no longer just execution tools and kind of, what their main goals are today.
Yeah, I think it's really been interesting, as you correctly pointed out, Amy. I'm been around a bit, and back when I first started, really it was predominantly around getting hold of the operation and modernizing it and getting some increases in throughput and efficiency and things like that. And it really has, the promise of all that really, I think, has always been, that's the first step. The second step should be looking at WMS and these floor execution systems as platforms for continuous improvement. And I think what has happened is that some vendors have stayed focused on hey, let's just get this in. We want to be sort of QuickBooks Online for WMS, get it in, and we'll give you these sets of improvements theoretically, and maybe people are happy with that. I think what I've always leaned into from the very first, things that Jim Heflin and I created around our systems, 20 years ago, was that the important thing is not a system, AWMS, it's the system for this operation. And that goes to this idea of enablement, but also goes to that idea of a platform for continuous improvement, and then minimizing the impedance for you to get those improvements done in ways that don't break the rest of your system, right? That's really the big factor.
Yeah. Okay. And I think growing complexity also has been sort of, something that's forced, if you will, a change in the WMS. We have omni-channel. A lot of companies are using outsourced 3PLs. There's increasing automation. So talk a little bit about how WMS has had to change to keep up with those factors.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Amy, because you think about like WMS as a platform, it's a coordination platform and an execution platform. So to your point about Omni and drop shipping and just a 3PL, and even work order, external work order processing, that goes into the coordination element, a bucket of functionality, and that's still a monstrous job of the WMS. And then to your point about automation and the we were just at Modex last week. The innovation that's going on out there on the automation side is astounding. It's like break speeds that it's running at. And the combination of that plus AI, is going to give customers a really terrific boost in scalability going forward, I believe. And so what has to happen though is that connection between the planning and the execution now becomes a bit more fluid. And I think that what happens is when a WMS vendor tries to they want to put a corral around all that, I think that they then struggle. And I think that I've always been the proponent of saying, look, we got to make the connections as easy as possible. We have to remove those impedances to the connections of things that allow better scalability, because there's new technology coming along, there's new automation, there's new ways of distributing orders, Omni and 3PLs, and get that coordination working in a way that those connections now become a pressure point. To your point exactly, I mean, the world has changed, and now those connections are more the pressure point that I think we have to address.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's shift and then talk about some of these WMS enablement tools, and maybe start with the most basic definition for viewers who may not be familiar. What do we mean by that when we talk about WMS enablement tools?
Yeah, I think that the word enablement is really the key here. It means to enable IT folks or third-party implementers, our implementers, or talented IT groups that want to do things with their WMS that may not, like out of the box, be the configuration or the flow of the work or the UI screens or the integration points that were originally configured. It would be more like saying, okay, we enable you, if you have the capacity and desire to do that, IT folks, you can do a lot of that stuff yourself, or we can get in one of our implementers or a third-party implementer. So the idea is to allow folks to decide, who can do the work, and not just, funnel that through our organization, or, because, we want people to, in this world, where we just discussed, we were out there last week and seeing all the stuff going on in Modex, and all of those, if you walked across those booths, they were basically all screaming about, not literally, but, metaphorically screaming, how do I get this tech to the floor faster, right? That's the point. And so enablement is all about getting those flows defined in a way that matches with the best possible flow for that individual operation, and then looking at the things that also we can do around enabling integrations and those integrations are just not technical integrations. They speak to the flow. Like, you're going to be picking with GT goods to person, and then but still shipping, parcel, and then now, hey, do you then also have a box builder in line and doing that kind of stuff? The flow of all those elements, really, we want to enable people to do those very rapidly and without a lot of technical knowledge, and just we're trying to create this more fluid way of improving your operation.
Yeah, I think fluid maybe is a good word for it. Like you said, they're trying to get this tech to the floor as fast as possible, but at the same time dealing with greater complexity. So just being able to hit the ground running, I guess, is really important in a customized way.
Yeah. And I think that, the one thing that we both know, about ops folks, right? Ops guys and gals, they want those things, but the thing that they most want is predictable operation, right? The ops folks that I know, and I've been working with the talented supply chain folks for 30 years now, they will take a lot of things, but they won't take unpredictable, flows in their operation. So I think that finding a balance, enablement is really, in our terms, right, the way I like to think about it, and the way I've thought about it for 30 years is that, we built enablement, through multiple platforms before, but this is a new level because of the inclusion of things like Claude, AI development. So now you have to say, okay, now how can we do this super fast sort of vibe development potentially, but then once we have a strategy for something that we've created, how can we then pragmatically take it into the operation? So you change from that rapid prototype vibe coding mode into saying, now this looks like it's getting ready to get into production. How do you do that in a way that allows you to make sure your operation is not negatively impacted by well-intentioned folks tossing stuff into production, right? So that, again, ops folks they disdain that, right? So we understand that. So finding that balance, I think, is the important point when we talk about enablement going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So then in terms of real world use cases, could you walk us through, how enablement works and how it plays to a company's favor when they're trying to, launch a new distribution center quickly or onboard a new 3PL customer, adapt workflows? What are, some of the use cases where enablement really shines?
Yeah, I'll just mention one that I just got today from one of our implementers. We as a software guys, a lot of times we're like, when we're doing a implementation when it includes hardware and automation and stuff like that, the hardware guys have they have a tough. I mean, their job is tough, right? They got to coordinate all the vendors and the iron and all the rest of that jazz, and it's really typical for them to just be running late on commissioning. That means getting their hardware turned over to us for our testing. And so, I've always said this, look, as an implementer, I spent 30 years doing implementation. I hate being the caboose on jobs. And so one of the things that you'd like to do is create an enablement structure for integrations. In our world, we call it the elastic communicator, that allows you to get ahead of that and say, we can create all the integrations ahead of time, test them all ahead of time before the vendor commissions their hardware, so that we're just, we know we're going to be the caboose. We just want to, we want to shorten up that last cycle that we have to do. And so I got a call from one of our implementers over the weekend, and they got the final specs. The final specs from the vendor were running late. They got them on Friday, and they actually worked for a few hours over the weekend and got them returned and we got them initial tested on Monday. 12 integrations to a whole material handling flow and stuff. That we did that over the weekend using Claude skills and our enablement tools for the elastic communicator. That historically would have taken 2 to 3 weeks. So that's, when we talk about enablement, what we're trying to do is sort of reduce the amount of effort, but also the knowledge required to do that, so that we can do a fast turnaround. Likewise, on our enablement front for our elastic communicator, our elastic UI, so the composable UI, we can describe in a few sentences the flow that somebody wants, and it will create the flow for the handhelds. And it's not perfect yet. It does remove 80 or 90% of the work of saying, here's the visual screen. It's very visual stuff that you create, and it will do that. So in our world of enablement, we want to very precisely match the flow that makes this one system, this one site or this one, 3PL or rollout work to its optimal to be the best version of it. So by doing that, you can say, okay, well, we're going to take our standard flow and ask it to make a couple little tweaks to that, remove a keystroke here, or show a different image here, do that kind of stuff. We can do that really rapidly and get it back in front of the customer so they can say, yes, this fits our operation really well. And doing that, again, in this sort of vibe coding way helps us. But as soon as the customer says, okay, that's what we want, what we do is we just use that to create configurations. And then we say, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to package it up, put it into UAT, and now it becomes sort of in that deployable process, that deployable flow that allows us to have predictability about what's going into production. So we're taking advantage of the sort of vibe coding part of that, through our enablement stack, but then turning it into a normal deployment flow. So we sort of achieve the best of both worlds. We're not going to give ops something that's unpredictable, but we want the IT folks or the implementer to run really fast and get those ideas out there. And then this middle ground is for us to say, put on the brakes just for a second, Tex. We're going to, slow it down, and not, a crazy amount, but at least get it into a process that we also achieve the goal of the head of ops saying, hey, don't throw unpredictable stuff into my system. So that's really, and I'm kind of diving in a little inside baseball about that, but it does point out where we are as, everyone's talking about cloud and doing stuff. I think that there's great things to be had there, but there is also a pragmatic part of this to address, assuaging the concerns of ops that somebody's just going to put something into production that causes all kinds of havoc.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, I want to break that down a little bit because I think that was a great example, but a lot of different things going on there. Right? So I think what I'm taking away from what you're saying, that balance of the flexibility and control is really very powerful for users, and the ability to kind of enable all of this change, but you're not creating chaos and you're getting things done faster. Is that sort of a fair summary?
Yeah, very much. Yes, I would say it this way: we're putting tools in the hands of folks who don't have to be as technical as they used to be. They just, they can describe what the problem is or describe the integration, and then we'll create those things. We'll create the screen flows, or we'll create the integration flows. That doesn't remove the need then to have a pragmatic approach to validation, which is also part of our typical process. We call it a challenge refine process, where we're always challenging the operations to be the best version of it, and we expect the customer to challenge us to be the best vendor, or our software to be the best software for that. And anybody who's installing software should have the same philosophy, which is you should expect the customer to ask you to be the best version of you, not generically, but for me as the customer and my site as the customer. And so, for allowing that operation to be the best version of us or of it means that we need to be the best version of us, in the way we do things. And so we understand all the things that we're trying to do to enable speed and stuff, but it's still incumbent on us to be the conscience sort of the process to make sure that we don't throw junk into production.
Right. Yeah. Okay, great. So we have that faster time to value, obviously the agility and the flexibility. Can you talk a little bit about cost? Obviously, everyone wants to always talk about that. How does this type of an enablement kind of help to lower the cost of ownership of a WMS system?
Right. I think it's all about options for the customer. Historically, what's happened is that you could say, hey, our WMS is a platform for continuous improvement. That's awesome. But if you have to send everything back to one vendor who has captured you, that you want to do those improvements, but you're sort of captured by this one vendor who has to do them for you, that creates sort of temporal, so time, impedance, but it also basically means you don't have any options for cost. So what we can do through these enablement frameworks is we have training for IT folks so they can do their own thing. If they have, again, IT folks are already overburdened. Let's just, it's crazy, right? So it becomes it's a combination of capacity, right, and desire on their part, right? Usually they have a lot of desire and less capacity to do things. But then what you want to maybe to do, they have a capacity to say, well, I'll do some simple RF screens, changes, etc., but I won't get involved in integrations, or maybe they'll flip-flop that. But the bigger thing is like we're out there training a myriad of integration partners that have a variety of different skills. Some focus around linear automation, that'd be like conveyors and things like that. Some focus around goods to person. Some focused around overall flow with pick wall, put walls, conveyance, robotics, that kind of stuff. And so I think it allows us to create a better value proposition by saying, hey, go to the vendor that most matches with your philosophy of how to move the needle forward, or your IT department can do that for you. And then, well, obviously we'd love to do the work, but we don't want to be the impedance. And you might be able to create a better situation from a cost perspective by working with another vendor. But so all of our philosophy is about enabling at different levels. So the operation folks can be enabled to change configurations really quickly and then copy them from site to site. And then up a level would be IT folks and implementers being able to do the screen flows and configurations. And then there's even more detailed enablement around changing the flow of the way our APIs work. And that would still be an implementer or somebody from our team. So different levels of enablement really are aimed at different audiences, and we're trying to continue to shove that sort of to the, we say shift left, to shift as much as possible to the ops folks that can describe what they want to do and allow them to make the changes.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that would also directly apply to if you're maybe a small or medium-sized business that allows you a lot more capability with the WMS than you might have the resources for otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, those sorts of companies want to be nimble, and then they don't have a super big budget a lot of times to contract with us or somebody else to do the work. And they want to be nimble, but they don't want to be restricted by our timelines or or somebody else's prices. They want to do things on their own. So the idea, enablement has to address the impedance part of things, the obstacles, and part of that obstacle has to be cost, and the other part has to be time frames.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Let's look forward a little bit and talk a bit about the future of WMS enablement. I think we touched a little bit on the increasing role, of AI and all kinds of intelligent automation and physical AI. What are you seeing, as you look forward ahead?
Yeah, I think that I see massive acceleration around this idea of vibe coding. And I like our approach. Now, every vendor might have an approach. Some of those a lot of vendors are just going to say, yeah, no, we're not letting you do that. But I think that's going to be a big play going forward, because I think people are going to say, well, hey, look, I vibe coded this receiving flow up in like 5 minutes using Claude. Why can't I do this? I think it's a good question to answer, right? We should be able to answer that question. Yes, if that's what you want, we should be able to do that. So I think there's that. But I think overall, though, I see from if you think about like the WMS or the systems, really the systems really ultimately are about the operational goal. So let's say your operational goal is scalability during busy season. Achieving those kinds of goals will, or maybe it's overall cost to serve, right? Those kinds of things are going to be more and more touched on by agentic flows. So think about like an operation that has super big scalability issues during peak season, which is usually, call it October 15th through December 15th, right? For a lot of customers. During that time, as an example, unless you're in Amazon where you can buy like 3 million square feet flat, most people have a variety of high storage and picked bases, and there's replenishments going on. And I would say that the only thing worse than a replen is the next replen that is going to be hitting us in like 5 minutes. So that coordination of wave release and replens and getting all that all those flows going, that's going to be more and more an agentic process. Now, it'll start with human in the loop, right? So you'll see this HIIL, human in the loop. Sometimes we talk about it that way. It'll start with that saying, hey, I'm seeing these things going on, and we have these recommendations of what to do. Can I do that? Yes. But eventually, as these systems gain confidence in the operation, again, going back to that idea that DCMs, DC managers disdain unpredictable flows, right? There'd be nothing worse right now than tossing some AI agents out there that are going to create unpredictable flows because they have maybe non-deterministic behavior. That means like you feed it the same information, they might have multiple results multiple times. You want those flows to be deterministic, which means you give it that information, it's always going to come up with that solution. Right now, guided by the fact that there's going to be variability in the information that will change those results, but you don't want this crazy stuff going on. Again, going back to that thing, but ops folks disdain unpredictable systems. So starting with human in the loop processes, agentic process, and then as they gain as they gain confidence, but also visibility about how the decisions were made. I think that's one of the other things that's super important, is to say, okay, well, you did this. I don't know that that's right. How did you make this decision? All of those things go into giving the ops folks the confidence to say, yes, I trust you with making those decisions, because I'm gonna have that predictable system, but I'm just gonna have it work from a flow perspective better, because we won't have those bottlenecks in replans. We won't have the bottlenecks in wave release trying to pre-replanning stuff, or we won't have the bottlenecks in the backside and scalability where we're overusing certain pack station areas and things like that. That is going to be the area, the initial, in my estimation, the biggest impact is going to be on those targeted sort of use cases that are really opening up, a little bit more in the agentic flows. Starting with human in the loop, but then eventually moving to fully autonomous.
So I spoke recently with a TMS vendor who kind of went so far as to say that because of the changes that are coming along through the agentic AI, that any TMS system that's out there now is going to have to completely be revamped in the next, say, 3 to 4 years to be able to accommodate the changing workflows. Do you think that WMS is in a similar situation? I'm just curious.
If you think about the two parts that we've talked about earlier, the planning and orchestration part and the execution part of things. I think that what will happen is on the planning and the planning and orchestration side, I think that that's going to be a much more fluid situation with AI going forward. The execution things, I think, just need to be separated out and say, okay, here's your abilities, here's all the abilities that we have to execute that with a human worker, to execute that with a digital worker, right? That'd be a agentic agent, execute that with a robot, and then coordinate that level of things. I think that that level of coordination really is the piece that is going to really be changing. Not the execution necessarily of those, but the elements of coordination and communication, connection to all those other platforms. There will be a layer in there that maybe you might think of as like a WES layer. I think it's simple. It's too simple to say that. It's because that communication orchestration layer is much more revolving around master flows in the facility, whereas like the WES is like, hey, I've got a flow that does this, I got a flow that does that. I think that these need to be a little bit more the master flow in the facility. So as opposed to like the WESs are really good at micro flows, I think these are going to be a little bit more involved in macro flows. So I think that layer is going to be something. And then on top of that, with the planning and coordination, I think there's going to be some revamp, because you'll have to say, hey, look, as we're shifting things, we're getting these inputs from these AI agents. Do we shift into a mode where we're completely waveless and then just let the AI agents, do the coordination once again they get the confidence of the operation? Those elements will be, that will be more of a revamping of the philosophical approach. I think the execution down underneath will be the execution, but there will be a bigger layer in between that does sort of this macro to micro flow coordination in the facilities.
Interesting. Okay, appreciate your perspective on that. Those were the things that wanted to kind of check in with you on. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on around this topic of WMS flexibility and how enablement tools are able to procure that you want to talk about?
Well, just that we're very passionate on making sure that customers get the implementation that they want, not just an implementation. And so I think that using these tools like vibe coding to quickly create flows that work better for them, right? And not necessarily how we've like somebody on our project development team, they're really clever and everything, but they don't think about all the flows, and that some customer might creatively be producing as people want to create differentiators for themselves. They want to have those targeted flows that are working more specifically to create an operation that is the best version of it. And I think that's where this industry is going to go. I think we're going to drag some of the vendors who don't want to do that. They'll just get dragged along at some point. But we're fully leaning into that. And I think operations should be the best version of them, not the best version of ways someone thinks they should be. I think that's got to be continuous. And the AI stuff is just going to allow us to do that even better.
Yeah. All right, great. Well, I think that best version idea surely will resonate with anybody listening. So thank you for your time today. Appreciate your insights, Mark.
Yeah, my pleasure always.
Absolutely. Talk to you again.